I am your host. This is Real Francamente, the podcast. I'm so excited to be here with you. Thank you so much for listening. And without further ado, let's bias your football content. Speaking of bias your football content, I want to thank y'all so much for listening to the first episode. I'm so floored by the response, by the reviews. Thank you so much. Keep that up. Keep listening. Keep rating. I can't believe we're at episode 2. Like, this is really happening. We really have a podcast. I'm so excited. I wanted to mention, and if this is your first one, I only recommend listening to the first one because it kind of explains the philosophy behind stuff, what we're going to be talking about, what we're about, and everything like that. And it's really good stuff. And I wanted to mention one more thing on branding, because we talk a lot about branding, being anti-misogyny, being unapologetically girly, right? And we purposely, and sometimes the reason I want to mention it is because sometimes this gets, people get confused and they're like, oh, is that a typo? Is that on purpose? We use all lowercase letters in everything, the branding, the logos, and even captions and emails and things like that. And that's because we hate capitalism. No, yes, but all joking aside, there is a philosophy behind it. And Bell Hooks did this famously. And others as well, that is just about like a sense of equity, right? Like, no one's better than anyone else. And so what is the need to even use capital letters? And aesthetically, it just looks better, in my opinion. So if you see our stuff and it doesn't have capital letters, that's not it's on purpose. It's part of our anti imperialism, our equity philosophy and mission. So that was just a little tidbit I wanted to add. But if you want more where that came from, please listen to episode 1, where we really broke down all of the branding, the philosophy, and it was a good time. So what is going on in the world of sports? I want it today. So I'm wearing a kit. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see it. If you're only listening, you can't, but go check it out just to see the kit. This was my World Cup good luck kit. And it is a Napoli commemorative Maradona kit. Give you one of these if you're watching. Or that is like the signature hand thing now for Real Francamente, because I do it so much just unironically, and I never noticed till episode 1. It's a Napoli commemorative kit. It says Maradona on the back, and it's obviously in like Argentina colors, kind of like it's got the stripes. And I didn't wear it for the first game of the World Cup. So we're talking World Cup. Let's talk World Cup. We are about a month out. It is unreal as an Argentinian Uruguayan to have lived through one of the best World Cups in terms of games only, not in terms of all the extra stuff that we can absolutely talk about tons. Like the corruption, but in terms of quality of game and in terms of obviously Argentina winning. First of all, it was the first country in 20 years to be a non-European country, a global South country that win the World Cup. That is incredible. That's amazing. That's a thing to be so happy about as anti-imperialists. So with this kit, it was my good luck kit. I didn't wear it for the first game, and we all know how that went. Argentina lost to Saudi Arabia in the first game. No one expected it. Now, there's something to that, because this isn't going to be an analysis of the World Cup type of episode, but I do just want to mention this one thing. Like, not analysis in the traditional sense. I mean, like, it's analysis in the Real Francamente sense, right? I do just want to mention that loss to Saudi Arabia was really, really interesting, right? Because obviously every team at the World Cup has one game that is the unlucky game. And generally, that game that goes badly or that goes unexpectedly for the teams tends to be their last, right? If we're talking knockout stages. That's just how it works. The game that sends you home tends to be your bad luck game. Argentina had the stars align in such a way for them that their worst game, their unlucky game, their unlikely to lose game was their first one. Their first one in the group stages. That is amazing. I mean, that is a level of universe and stars aligning for Argentina that's like no one expected it. Yeah, there were memes, everyone made fun of it, but then they went on to win the whole thing and not lose another game. So it was pretty amazing. So I did not wear the Napoli kit that game. I'm not saying I did this by switching to it, but there was also no proof I didn't do it. Okay. So once I started wearing the kit, one thing about Argentinians too that was going around, there were memes and everyone was tweeting about it, was what we call cábalas. And cábalas are like good luck or like superstitious things that we do. It could be where you're sitting on the couch in the order, that you were sitting in. It could be about where you watch it physically at a bar versus at your house. It could be just different things you wear or whatever. And we're very, very serious about it. Some of us. There was even a coven of witches involved in doing witchcraft and different spells, such as putting players in the freezer, other team players in the freezer. That was a thing collectively the witches did, and it worked. And so there was a lot of like witchy, like awesome kind of magic stuff around it. But I wore the kit the second game on, and we know what happened. So again, it was the magic of Diego. It was Diego sending us, his blessing, his love, and that was the kit I wore for every game. So I was like, today we're talking World Cup, we're talking Argentina. We're gonna delve deep into some myths and things that have to do with the way Argentina is spoken about throughout the world. But I had to pull out the good luck kit. In my opinion, the final was the best final I've ever seen in sports, not just because my country won it, but it was just an insane final. Like, if it weren't for the nerves, I probably would have enjoyed it more. And by the way, I've rewatched it like 5 times since, and yeah, it's more enjoyable when you know what's gonna happen and when you can laugh at how happy Mbappe gets and stuff like that, because he will be crying later. So it was really, really awesome. Indescribable feeling. We went to Times Square to celebrate. It was unreal. It was surreal. Times Square was awesome. One of the reels, watch our reels on Real Francamente on Instagram. One's doing numbers still to this day, like a month later. I also loved how amazing it was to see a 35-year-old Messi win the thing that he was missing. And I say that because some people consider it the thing that he was missing in order to be considered the GOAT. In my opinion, it was not necessary. He already was the GOAT after Maradona. But for all of the haters, it was like the thing he was missing, right? And he got it. And what was amazing is that we're seeing him at his best stage in life. He's living his best life. He's in his most happy era. And like, we just love to see that. And he won the World Cup surrounded by a team that were fans first. Some of them were kids. And obviously, were kids and like were already that was his idol. That was their idol. And they would say, there's little videos of them as kids saying like, I love Messi and I want to play the World Cup and win the World Cup. And like, they got to do it with him. So the chemistry, that speaks a lot to the chemistry of the team, right? Which a lot of people talk about the chemistry and the importance of it. I think the importance of it is massive. And you can see that when you look at other good teams. And we can even look at France, right? As a counter example. You can have a team of superstars. France is a team of superstars. We can't deny that. And they won the last World Cup, so it's not like they won the last one. They're really, really good. But what they're missing is, I think, what Argentina had and what few other teams had in this World Cup, but not none, few. And it's that chemistry that is just so deeply woven in, because this is a team of players who would literally kill. I mean, Dibu Martinez said he would literally kill for Messi. Like, he said that. So they are not only his teammates, but his fans. They all wanted it for him almost more than for themselves. And like, that is an energy, like that pushes, right? That pushes pushes the team forward in a way. And so, yes, of course, Messi's the GOAT, but he himself would even say the importance of the team. And many of the times that he won man of the match, because he won it a lot, he actually passed it off to a teammate who he feels did better. He is one of the most humble people, and that, you know, is one of those places where we see it. So all of those things, just amazing. That it's unreal. It feels unreal. It feels surreal that we're sitting here talking about World Cup champions, the third star on the jerseys, Argentina. It was just so beautiful. It was so needed for those of us that enjoy the sport also from an anti-imperialist lens of like saying, okay, this is the global South outside of Europe, right? So 8 teams have won the World Cup. Outside of Europe, only 3 have. So only of those 8, only 3 are outside of Europe, and those 3 are all in South America, and Argentina is one of them. So for them to get their third star, it was massive. It was massive. We're going to talk a little bit about how folks misunderstand global South and all that stuff, but I just wanted to talk a little bit first about some kind of current stuff that's been going on since the World Cup with some of these players. So first of all, the way these players are getting snubbed as world champions is embarrassing and disgusting. I have to start with Messi at PSG. What a disgrace of an organization and a team to literally have the world's best player by every measure. And because Mbappe is a little crybaby, they didn't do a little welcome. Like, they couldn't do a single welcome. Like, Brighton and Hove Albion. Did I say that right? Because sometimes I mix those words up. I don't know. Alexis McAllister plays at Brighton. And that is a team that welcomed their champion like they should, like they should have. I mean, there was just a massive, massive ceremony. How are you PSG and you have Messi and you do nothing? That's embarrassing. So starting from Messi, and like, he doesn't care. This is like these are the things he does not care about, because he just went right in and started scoring immediately. Like, he's not someone to like cry about it like if it were, you know, a certain rapist. He doesn't care. He doesn't even know what's going on when he had his 1000th, I can never pronounce that word correctly, his 1000th game during the World Cup. He like found out in the after, like in the interview, he was like, oh, that, like, cool. Like, he does not care about anything but kicking the ball and scoring. Like, that's how he is. But it looks really, really bad on PSG. It looks bad on PSG because you've got these smaller teams doing stuff for their world champions who and players who didn't have the magnitude of importance that Messi had are getting these types of welcomes. You saw at the Manchester United game, literally in England, Argentina flags. That was a crazy sight to see, like, people being so excited for their World Cup winner. Like, how are you PSG and you don't do that? Embarrassing. No welcome. And then other players just getting snubbed for playing time. Like, what? Cholo Simeone, baby, daddy, what is you doing? What is you doing? DePaul, a World Cup winner, and not just any World Cup winner, he played a lot. He played really, really well. And El Cholo is sitting him. El Cholo hasn't played since he's been back. You're going to tell me it's because you want to rest him? Messi played. You've got, I mean, there, and Atleti could use DePaul. I want to do a parenthesis because I promised you on episode 1 we were going to do thirst. This isn't thirst, but it is drams. It is drama. And DePaul's actually going through it a little bit. I don't know if you guys have kept up with the goss. But DePaul has an ex-wife and kids and including a baby, like a baby. So this is like a recent split that apparently is a little bit thirsty for attention, because at first the story was that he's a deadbeat dad. He doesn't want to see his kids. And so I started to look into it and I was like, oh, damn, that sucks. You know, whenever something taints one of the players, it's like, oh, shit, like you got to like them less or whatever. I started looking into it. And then as it turns out, and important to also note, DePaul is dating his girlfriend. His current girlfriend is one of the most famous pop stars. She's like a pop singer in Argentina. And she's got like a lot of little fans. Like imagine someone like, I would compare her to like Ariana Grande. Not like a Taylor Swift level, but I would say like Ariana Grande. So she still has her stands, right? And so they went sleuthing and they found out that DePaul's ex actually has been making a bunch of fake accounts to basically like slander Tini, DePaul's current girlfriend, and just make up lies about DePaul. And they found out that he actually has been spending time with his kids. So there's so much drama there that I just love. It's like, I love that type of drama as an outsider. I don't love drama when it happens to me, but I love it when it's like this. It's like a soap opera. So I don't know what's going on. Maybe it's emotional. Maybe El Cholo Simeone knows something we don't, that DePaul doesn't want to play. I don't know. Regardless, I don't like it. I don't like it. And I want to see what happens with this love triangle mess. Look it up though, or message me. I'll get you guys the scoop if you want. And I want to also mention something that didn't sit right with me with this current event stuff about the Argentinian world champions. So Enzo, famously, who plays for Benfica, famously was going to get sold to Chelsea. Chelsea, by the way, fascist FC. I hate Chelsea. And what they're doing is an abomination to football, with like just throwing all this money at players, but it doesn't even make any sense the way they're doing it. Like many teams have thrown money at players, but it just doesn't make any sense the way they're doing it. Anyway, there was those rumors that Insta was going to go to Chelsea. It didn't happen. It fell through. The numbers, the figures that were being talked about with that deal were high. It was like 120 million, I think they had mentioned, which is a lot. But that's a discussion to have about capitalism in sport, about what a human, like what is a value of a player, really? What is a value? But what we saw were a lot of these white English pundits and media personalities and former players coming out, and I forget who it was, so I'm not even going to attempt to hypothesize on who it was, but I have three in mind. It's one of them, who said, oh, when this was about to happen, oh, like I get that he's a world champion and he's really good and everything, but is he really worth that price? Which you might think is not a terrible question, but it was very coded because it was specifically when this South American young world champion who plays for a team that's good, like it's a good league. The Portuguese league is a good league. Okay, fast forward to yesterday, all of the drama that's happening with Chelsea stealing the Ukrainian player, and I'm not going to try to pronounce his name because I'm terrible at it. At the Eastern European names. But okay, all the drama with them stealing that player from Arsenal. I forget what the price was, but it was like what it was like close to 120. I think it was 110 maybe. 110 million. Crickets on whether it's too much or not. That man plays in the Ukrainian league. That man did not go to the World Cup. No one has heard of him. He just came out of the blue. Everyone thinks like he looks like Holland, so he's going to be the next Holland. I honestly think that's what's blinding people's judgment, and not a word about if that's too high to pay for him. Because he's a blonde, blue-eyed Ukrainian who they can also use for Ukraine propaganda, by the way, which is a whole other story. And that's what tells you that sentiment of anti-South American bias is real. Because you're going to tell me that Enzo, who's a World Cup winner and and not only a winner like that just sat on the bench, he played every single game and he scored worldies in the World Cup, is not worth that price, but someone like random is? No. That's not a coincidence. And the way, and there was not a single question about the price. Now, yes, we should be questioning when like, why are people paying this much money for, like, why are we throwing this much money? Why do billionaires have that kind of money to spend? Okay. And I also want to say that thank you. This just reminded me, and I want to mention this, even though it's not related to Argentina, but Darwin at Liverpool. A lot of people hate Darwin because they don't think he scores enough. And the reason they hate him is because Liverpool paid so much for him. Whose fault is that? Is that Darwin's fault? Is that the player's fault when a billionaire spends the money that they do? And should we be chastising and dehumanizing these players because we feel that they were paid too much for, so they owe us? Like, I do not like the way these discussions are headed at all. But I just had to throw that in. And now, like, I just hope, to go back to the pundits, I just hope that the bias, in a bad way, not in the bias your football content way, right? Like the blind, like anti-South American sentiment, xenophobia, whatever you want to call it. We need to call it out more. We need to call it out more because it's absolutely ridiculous, and I'm over it. I wanted to also mention, shout out to the People's Forum in New York City, which had a showing of a brilliant documentary called Maradona by Kusturica. He was a player himself, and he did a brilliant documentary by Maradona. And Maradona is like one of our spirit guides and ancestors. I have a little shrine to him. Like, just an incredible person. And this links back to bias your football content, because my philosophy has always been Maradona's philosophy. My philosophy has always been being on the Maradona side of life, right? Like, and he talk about bias your football content. Like, he is one of the most controversial figures, and proudly, I mean, he just did not step outside of those morals and values that had to do with, human beings, like human rights, social justice. One of my favorite moments is when he wore the shirt that said "Stop Bush," and it had a Nazi symbol on it. Like, I mean, he's just brilliant, right? And that documentary, if you haven't seen it, it's from 2008. Look it up; it's so good. And I always like shout out to Maradona, obviously, but I loved the comparison. So Messi obviously gets compared to Maradona a lot. And I love that in a good way. But especially just to throw it back to Que miras bobo, that the famous meme that's come out from that moment, the day that Messi did the Topo Shisho celebration. He got a little spicy, right? And people started to say, like, oh, finally we're seeing the Maradona side of Messi, which I think is awesome. Like, I want more of that. I want him to do more of that. But I think that also shows his humility, right? Because the fact that it happened, the fact that him getting spicy surprised us all so much, shows that he never does it. He never does it. So it was really a unique, it really was provoked by these statements, by these anti-South American statements. Like, it really does get to be too much. So talk about bias your football content, huh? Hi again, this is Franca. I'm your host for the Real Francamente podcast, and I wanted to hop on to tell you a little bit about another project I have that you may be interested in, which is Sol y Luna Consulting. It is a project I am working on, that aims to democratize knowledge and help folks understand some diversity, equity, and inclusion concepts that maybe you've never heard of, that maybe you want to know more of. I help businesses, I help organizations be better about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So check it out. We have some cool content. It's at Sol y Luna Consulting on Instagram, and at Sol y Luna Consult, no ing, on Twitter. And our website is www.solilunaconsulting.com. Tell your friends. DEI work is for everyone. We need all hands on deck. The types of things we do workshops, we do classes, we learn, we have fun, we laugh. So if any of this is up your alley, go ahead and check us out. Thank you. So I wanted to talk about this in a more formal way than I have been, because I'm not one to not talk about stuff when it comes up. So you may have seen some of this, but I want this on the record. I want this on the record. So a lot of the discourse around Argentina as a country, as a nation, as a team, it needs to be unpacked. It needs to be unpacked. There's a lot of imperialism and a lot of problematic at best ways that we have discourse around Argentina as a country. And so I'm going to unpack that for us a little bit. But I want to start by saying, but I want to start by mentioning the way that we saw the glorification of France, the French squad, being Black, but mostly African, right? Black African players of Black African descent, which is awesome for representation. But without the analysis of realizing that the reason why that team is so Black is not rainbows and butterflies and feel good diversity, equity, and inclusion reasons. It's colonization. It's exploitation, right? That is why the team looks like that, but refugees or immigrants that look like them in France, who are not famous football players, are not welcome. So there's a hypocrisy there in the way the team stands in some way for this diversity, which is the exact metaphor for what's wrong with the way we talk about race, right? Because we should know, one of the things I say a lot, mostly in DEI spaces, but it applies here, right? Identity politics without intersectionality is nothing. I'm going to say that again. Identity politics without intersectionality is nothing. And that is the way that we see, for example, legacies whitewashed. This is timely, so I can mention real quick the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. Okay, the way it's whitewashed and used as this, like, this nice little like packaged message of peace and unity and all that stuff, when that couldn't be farther from the truth of everything he stood for. And he was also hated by the state, the country, the state as in, sociopolitically, not a specific state. And now we've got this, like, look, see, like MLK wanted us all to get along, and that could not be farther from the truth. And then you see people who are complicit in the murders of Black people in the United States writing their little peace messages about MLK. Identity politics without intersectionality is nothing. We cannot look at a team and go, they have a lot of Black people, that means they're so welcoming, that country is. Because knowing the truth about France, it's a colonizing nation, first of all, that still has colonies, that the damage they've caused in colonies, most famously Haiti, is irreversible. By the way, Haiti, like there's images, amazing images of Haitians in Haiti. They set up big screens just like they do in many countries. And like the amount of Argentina jerseys, the way they were rooting for Argentina in Haiti because of the way that France colonized them and the way that Argentina is a global South nation. So specifically in the US, we've got an epidemic of anti-intellectualism. And what that leads us to is blatant ignorance around the way we talk about race and race relations. And this is one of those examples. Now, this isn't to say that anyone who was like, oh, I'm rooting for France because they're Blacker is wrong. Yeah, like anyone can root for for who they want, how they want, and for the reasons that they want to. But there is a way that we need to unpack false dichotomies and false comparisons. and false insults and false, like just falsities that we create about countries based on our ignorance, right? So I wanted to mention that. And then to go into the Argentina racism issue and discussion. Yes, okay, let's talk about it. I want to drop another pearl of wisdom that I say a lot in my personal life, okay? And that is that America is a continent. I don't ever say American if I'm talking about a United Station person. You may have heard me say United Station before. I have stopped explaining it because most people I talk to know me, so they know what I mean. But America is a continent. It is not two continents. It is certainly not three continents. It is one. As such, it is appropriation to say American when you mean the United States, which is just one of the countries in the massive continent that spans from Canada to Argentina. Since it's a continent, the entire continent has had the same history of genocide and slavery. That means the entire continent has anti-Blackness, anti-Indigenous sentiment, anti-Indigenous racism, and all of those, and xenophobia. All of those things exist in every country in the Americas. Some countries have a little bit more representation than others. That's a whole other thing, right? But remember that identity politics with intersectionality is nothing. So we've got an entire continent that has been colonized. The whole continent was colonized once by Europe, right? I'm saying that, I'm putting this in very, very simple terms, so bear with me. But then what we have with the global South, okay, so that's most of Latin America, the Caribbean, basically every country that's not Canada and the US, in America, the continent, right? We have a recolonization period that occurs from the US colonizing the rest of Latin America with a few exceptions. And those tend to be the ones we demonize for being communist monsters, which is all rooted in fake news, but we'll save that for another day, okay? So the US, believing themselves the owners of the world for whatever reason, that's called imperialism, goes and recolonizes the Americas, causing dictatorships, causing disrupting governments, disbanding governments, putting in puppet governments everywhere in the Americas. For that reason, we have to be very careful if we are United Station of any color, because United Station imperialism is not exclusive to just white people, unfortunately. And that's where identity politics with intersectionality and nothing comes in, okay? So as United Stations, who, by the way, the United States is the most brainwashed nation in the world. You can believe what you want, but literally facts are facts. And the way we're propagandized from everything from cereal boxes to every single show and Hollywood and movie, not to mention curricula and the way we're taught and all this stuff. Like, this is the most heavily propagandized nation in the world. So we're propagandists to believe this is the best country in the world, right? And that goes beyond any sort of identity. If you buy into that propaganda, it doesn't matter what color you are. That is imperialism that we are putting on other nations that in many cases we've never been to or know very little about besides what is in our biased textbooks, right? If you want a prime example of that propagandization, fascist dictators admire and have admired the way we indoctrinate our kids to pledge allegiance to a piece of cloth every single day. Every single day. That is indoctrination. Fascist dictators could not get away with that much. When someone comes from outside, when people come from other countries and see that, they literally are horrified at what we make kids say and do every single day. The Pledge of Allegiance is the most fascist shit you've ever heard. And we make kids say it every day. That's a big example of indoctrination, but there's way more subtle ones. Again, I'll save that for another podcast, okay? But I'm saying all this to say because with imperialism, we take it as far as applying the way that we talk about race and inequality in the US to other countries when it doesn't apply for many, many, many reasons. I was really fortunate to sit in on an incredible discussion that was hosted by a space in Buenos Aires. It was, obviously, I joined on Zoom. It's called Espacio Malcolm. It's named for Malcolm X, and it was led and run by Black Argentinians, Afro-Argentinos, Afro-Argentinians, Afro-Latinos, okay? Which, by the way, when we conveniently spout propaganda points about how racist Argentina is, we are actually erasing an entire community of people in Argentina, which is the Afro-Argentinians. No one asks them a question. Everyone loves to just imperialistically put these values rooted in nothing on this country they've never been to without taking one single cue from a Black Argentinian. That's a little problematic, no? Regardless of the color of the person doing the critique. So around the time, but it was before the final, an article came out in the Washington Post that was called, "Why Are There No Black People on the Argentinian National Team?" Now, most people didn't read that article. First of all, because if you had, the article is actually really nuanced and she comes to really good conclusions about how it literally is representative of what Blackness means and what negro means specifically in the Southern Cone, in South America, in Buenos Aires. So the conclusion of the headline of that article was clickbait. And because United Stations don't read, no one read the article. They assumed it was the person saying that country's so racist, and they just shared it everywhere like wildfire. And they didn't even realize they were actually spreading a really good nuanced article about what the real situation is, which is that we shouldn't expect it to look the way that the nation doesn't look currently. Now, there was also some problematic stuff. I learned this at that Espacio Malcolm discussion that was based around this article led by Black Argentinians. Now, as a Latina with white privilege, who does work around race and racism and intersectionality, that's my area of expertise, I'm in an interesting position because I have white privilege. So I never speak for anyone that has less white privilege than me. But I do have the history of the imperialism, of the history, of how all these things work that I can always provide for context. That's what I'm doing here. And I always take my cues from people in the communities I'm speaking about first. And that's what we need a little bit more of when we're having these discussions. Okay, so again, I'm in this circle. I'm invited into this space. And I say invited, not that I was invited. I just mean I was allowed to enter this space, right? It was for everyone, anyone that wanted to join. And it was one of the most validating experiences I've ever had, because all of the ideas that I had that I hadn't officially phrased publicly is everything that these folks were saying about what was so wrong with that article being written by a United Station, leaving out all sorts of context and important, context that would have helped understand why there's not Black people as we know them in the United States on the Argentinian national team. Now, one of the best things that happened to me in that meeting was finding out that Black Argentinians, Afro-Argentinos in that space, and this is like this was said in such a way that it wasn't a discussion. It wasn't brought up as like, hey, it was literally like an established fact. They consider Maradona to be one of them, to be negro, because to be negro in Argentina means something contextually specific. And the way that Maradona was discriminated his whole life everywhere for having curly, big hair, right? And actually he has Afro-Argentinian heritage, but he also has indigenous heritage. And so even in Argentina, he's considered negro. And so the way they claim that and they reclaim that as a good thing, like he's one of ours, I loved that because it shows exactly the nuance that goes into your values and your ideas and the way you live your life also playing into the spaces you're allowed to be in. Maradona fought his whole life for equality and equity and anti-imperialism. And that's what these folks in the Espacio Malcolm are for as well. And so they consider him one of their own. And so basically it was to debunk this article to say, who is a United Station woman, fundamentally imperialist, because in academia, and I'm in academia, I have been for like 15 years, but if you count my student, my time as a student longer than that, there's an extreme problem of imperialism in academia. It is very hard to be in academia and be anti-imperialist and anti-capitalist. So most people have that imperialist lens that even applies to the way they look at race in this country that's in the Southern Cone, that's in the global South. We need to also establish that fact, okay? Argentina is a global South nation. Just as recently as a month ago, they had an attempted coup there because the United States can't stand anyone in their backyard. I'm doing air quotes because that's such a ridiculous term. It implies that the US somehow owns Latin America, which is ridiculous. And we need to stop using it. I used it in quotations, okay? Someone in their backyard, how dare they actually have policies that help their own people, right? And so they tried to coup Argentina. They are successfully cooing many other countries in Latin America. And so how can, it's the inflation there, people are starving, okay? How can you look at a global South nation from the, again, quote unquote, richest country in the world, but definitely the most imperialist, right? And try to judge them? How can you live in the most racist country in the world, the US, and try to call out another nation for racism, but still be rooting for your country so you don't see that same problem in your own country where literally every single day at least one Black person is murdered by police these days? Because 2022 was the highest number of police murders in the history of since they've been doing these statistics. So nothing's gotten better since 2020 when everyone had their reckoning, right? That's for starters. But now you've got people who are so hypocritical that they literally support the United States and then turn around and claim, oh no, don't support that country, they're racist. Am I in the twilight zone? We have got to do better about this nuance. It is embarrassing. It's laughable to be that hypocritical. So no, it does not mean, and I have not said, nor will I ever say, that Argentina is not racist. It does not mean that Argentina did not wipe out communities that are indigenous and Black. That did happen, okay, as it happened here and as it happened in all of the Americas. But we have got to understand that the way that we understand and talk about race in the US, we can't be imperialist about that. The histories are different. The contexts are different. The way people are racialized, and actually the way people are racially abused in Argentina, okay, is not the same way as it happens here. And so we need to open, how could we look at someone? This was one of the things I learned in that conference. How what was the word they used? It was like not egotistical, but how like almost like delusional. Like how like self-centered do you have to be to look at someone and go and know if they're Black or not? Which is a whole question, right? In the United States, so then we've got the whole question of like, is it the one drop rule? Is it the white passing thing? Is it this? Those are all things we can discuss, and there's all sorts of different ways that people go about it, especially in Black communities. Some people believe that if you're if you're light skinned, if you're mixed, it's not the same thing as being Black. There is as what they consider being Black. There is definitely colorism. There is definitely all of these things that come into play that are contextually very specific to the US. And so how dare we judge when we won't do it with our own national team specifically because we're talking about the US. So you've got what I'm talking about are United States national team stands, because these are stands that have no ability to critically realize like the imperialism that's at play that does affect and is promoted also by their national team. Unable to see that, but able to have all the smoke for other countries. Which, by the way, if we look at imperialism, Argentina is way more marginalized than the United States, going beyond the race thing. So how dare we, a country that we facilitated, backed, and ordered military dictatorship under Operation Condor that caused thousands of people to be disappeared, tortured, murdered. Pregnant women had their babies stolen. Literally, that's what it's about when we see these narratives come out about like the abuelas de Plaza de Mayo discovering new grandchildren. They're everyone like nietos. It means grandchild and it's global, like it's not. And so they're reuniting families from literally the dictatorship that the US backed and ordered in Argentina and in many places in Latin America under Operation Condor. So we're the country, the US is the country that caused that. And we don't have any smoke for that. But then it's, let's be moralist. Let's virtue signal about there not being a visibly Black person on this team. First of all, if we're looking at it that way, one of the critiques I saw that was brilliant too was like, okay, why doesn't the Ukrainian team have any Chinese players? They just threw out, whatever. Like, why doesn't whatever? You could throw out any country, but like, it's a futile question, right? Because yes, there probably could be more representation. There could be more ways that we get people involved, but if at the time that's the best team, that's the best. It's like it's futile, right? It's a futile discussion. But then you have to also look at all these other nuances. Like my point is, don't enter these discussions unless you understand all this nuance, and you're ready to have that smoke and not be a hypocrite. Because that's one of the things we're not going to do. Not to mention all of another talking point that is actual literal CIA propaganda is that all the Nazis, in Argentina and all that stuff, like the Nazis are all in Argentina, or like Argentina's all Nazis, which is anti-Semitic as hell because, yes, again, America is a continent, right? Nazis escaped to everywhere in the Americas. Nowhere were they more welcome than in the US, where they were given the highest positions out of anywhere else that took in Nazis. Not only that, but the Nazis were actually inspired by the United States, right? Like they took Jim Crow. They looked at like the way like segregation and like racism worked. They were like, we can do better. We're going to inspire ourselves with that and like improve it, right? Now you've got Nazis escaping back here. They get given the biggest positions, okay? But the CIA wants you to believe that Argentina is just like a Nazi country so that you will not look at all of the things the CIA did there. And you're buying into it. Because, by the way, the number of Jewish refugees that also found a home in Argentina is massive. In fact, excuse me, if you are Latino, you may have heard of the stereotype of Argentinians as having big noses. They can be called narizones or narigones, depending on where you're from. And that stereotype comes from anti-Semitism, because that's the number, like how high of a number of Jews that escaped also to Argentina and were taken in. I was born in a hospital called Israelitas, after Israel. And that we can also talk about how problematic that is, right? In terms of like Israel and Palestine. But the point is that you're spouting myths, you're spouting propaganda against a country that's in the global South, instead of celebrating the fact that a country in the global South won, and not a European country, we're acting like, oh no, it's actually just European and whatever. Like the erasure that goes into that, when, by the way, most of the people that had hate for Argentina, this is the problem. This is the problem, is the hypocrisy in most of the people that had all this smoke for Argentina. Secretly, they just hate Argentina because they hate Messi or because they hate how good Argentina is, or it's always for like reasons that have, or they're like Rape Naldo stands. And so they have to make up stories and moralize and virtue signal about why they hate Argentina, because it can't just be based on how much they hate Messi, right? And that's my biggest thing, is like what you want, do what you want, and don't be a fucking hypocrite. Stand on it. You want to hate Messi because he's too good? Say that. You want to hate Messi because he's not Rape Naldo? Say that. You hate Barcelona, so you hate Messi? Say that. Do not virtue signal and act like it's for these, like, you know, moral reasons that you're just like so morally superior to all of us. Just stand in your bias, right? Stand in your bias your content. And yeah, like I had to kind of set some of this stuff straight, because it got to be too much. It's died down now a little, but you still see this narrative of like, oh, they this and they cheated and whatever. Like, a lot of the Argentinians were tweeting about how if they could have purchased a World Cup, people wouldn't be starving, and you know, people would be able to afford a loaf of bread. Like, so there's all sorts of nuance there. This is my favorite way to analyze and look at football, is to be able to have these discussions. So yeah, controversial. We got into the weeds there, right? Like, I don't know. I got in my bag and I went with it. But all of this to say that you should denounce neutrality, bias your football content, and stand behind your whatever your reasoning is for stuff, even if it doesn't make you look good, like, because it makes you look worse to be a hypocrite. And read a book, read an article, reach out to me. I'll send you a syllabus. Don't, and like, especially articles you share, don't just share an article because the headline looks good, because then you look dumb when the article turns out to actually not be consistent with your assumptions. So vamos Argentina. I mean, what else can I say? Incredible time to be alive, and win for the whole global South. Let's continue these discussions on the socials. Let me know what you think. I love y'all. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope you liked it. This has been Real Francamente, the podcast. My name is Franca. I'm your host. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Real Francamente on both, and check out our website, www.realfrancamente.com. You can find lots of content there, or you can contact us directly with any questions or comments. All links and ats for all of this, plus many of the spaces and all the things we mentioned today that maybe you're interested in looking up or reading more about, they'll all be in the show notes if you need them or if you want them. And just for ease of not having to spell it yourself, or you can contact me with anything else that you heard that piqued your interest that you may want more info on. Please subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform, and maybe leave us a rating and a review if it's good, and share with all your friends. Don't forget to bias your football content, and I'll see you on the next one. Gracias y chao.